Story number one.
My dad had a friend called Ron, who would come to my parents' home each Sunday for a roast dinner and would always bring some form of toy with him for me. Naturally, I always looked forward to seeing Ron and seeing what Barbie or Skydancer I was going to get this week. I later found out he was going through a divorce and would come over to get out of the house and tell his life story to my mom and dad over numerous bottles of wine. Just a note, my dad is a high-ranking police officer and he regularly takes our Alsatian, Sophie, with him to work. I must have been around 7 or 8, and my older brother Corey was 18 or 19 when this happened. It was the summer holidays and I was off school. I remember I was playing in the blown-up paddling pool in the garden with Sophie. The water was up to my ankles and I was splashing her while she was trying to catch the water in her mouth. I thought this was hilarious. There was a small convenience store at the end of the road, and Corey either was on the way there or on the way back. I just remember him saying that he was going to the shop and he would get me a princess magazine while he was there. My mom and dad must have been at work. I'm not sure how long I was playing there, but next thing I see is Ron unlocking the back gate, coming into the garden. He asked where my parents were, and I simply shrugged and carried on. He was standing by the back door just looking down at me. He started to comment on how nice my bathing suit was, and that my parents had sent him over to take me to the park, and I have to hurry up because it's getting dark outside. I suddenly became excited. I ran into the house quickly to get changed, and Sophie was right behind me. I was in the process of putting some knickers on when the phone rang. Running into my parents' bedroom, I jumped on the bed and answered it. On the other end was my mom. She said a terrible feeling had come over her, and she had just had an urge to call home and check on us. Corey is at the shop. Me and Sophie are getting ready to go to the park, and Ron is outside. He hasn't bought me a present this time, but he promises to bring me one next time. I gleefully giggled. It went all quiet on the phone. After a few seconds, I could hear my mom asking me to repeat myself. I explained that Ron had come over. I was getting ready to go to the park with Sophie and that I would be back before tea. The phone went dead. I straight away thought that I was in some kind of trouble. It sounds silly, but I thought that maybe I was taking too long. Maybe I should have been to the park already. Jumping up, I saw that Ron had climbed the stairs and now was standing on the landing, just plainly staring at me. All I had on were some pink knickers. "I'm nearly ready," I shouted. He took a step towards me and Sophie lunged straight at him. I remember hearing them both go down the stairs. I could hear her growling and a massive commotion downstairs. I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble now, and ran down the stairs after them. Sophie had Ron's arm in her mouth and was sitting straight on top of him. She was still somehow growling and looking him straight in the eyes. That's when my dad and 2 of his friends came barging in the door. He simply had to say one word to Sophie and she let go of Ron's arm. It was torn to shreds. I seriously think I saw the bone. My dad took Ron away and nothing else was said. My dad did end up taking me and Sophie to the park that day. Many years later, Ron was brought up in conversation. Apparently, he had to have surgery on his arm where Sophie had latched on. In his car, they found an old bulky video camera, some rope, tape, and a large household knife. I asked if he's in prison now, and my dad just looked me straight in the eyes and said, he didn't make it there.
Story number two.
Well, let me start this story by saying this happened almost 3 years ago, when I was still pregnant of my first child and was living with my sister, since I had just gotten married and my mother's house had no space for another 2 members. Also, I apologize for not being very clear on the details. I'm trying my best, but it happened quite a while ago, so bear with me. I mostly stayed at home, with the occasional trips to the national park or casual strolls around the neighborhood. My husband stayed home until 6 p.m. and then would be off to work. It wasn't the ideal post-marriage scenario I had in my dreams, but it did the job. I can't quite remember if it was late or not, but one night I was home alone watching TV. My husband was at work and my sister was at the supermarket. It was all quiet until I noticed our water dispenser's bottle was almost empty, so I called the delivery service. I went back to watching TV, and after a few minutes I heard the doorbell being ringed. I was so relieved since I was dying of thirst at this point, so I made my way to the front door and noticed two things that raised some huge red flags for me. First, I could hear what clearly was a car engine, and I knew water bottles are delivered in a motorcycle with a small cart attached to its back. Second, I could hear someone on the phone saying something along the lines of, "We're here," or something. Now, my sister's house by no means was on a dangerous part of town, but it wasn't exactly the most peaceful neighborhood either. Burglaries were really not unheard of, and there has been some murders, although they were the result of heated discussions between drug addicts. Back to the story. I thought I was maybe overthinking the whole situation. Maybe it was some of my friends coming to visit me. I quickly scratched this theory when I asked, "Who is it?" And a raspy voice said, "Water guy." Not taking any chances, I slowly made my way back out the living room and slowly closed the door. They didn't ring the doorbell nor call me, but I could still hear the car engine and see their shadows from below the door. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the car doors opening and closing multiple times, which could mean that there were more than one guy, and the car driving off. I was still freaked out but relieved that they were gone, whatever their intentions were. Not long after this, the water delivery guy arrived, and I'd asked if he had sent someone earlier, which he denied. My heart sank. I stood there while he delivered the water bottles, trying to find an explanation. Thankfully, nothing else happened, but some weeks later, I saw in the local newspaper that a group of criminals were arrested for attempted break-ins. Apparently, their MO was passing off as sanitation maintenance workers or other random services, and then forcefully entering the house after the owner opened the door. What scares me the most, however, was the fact that they knew I had asked for a water delivery. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe they were spying on me as I made the call, which isn't unlikely since I talk pretty loud on the phone. Either way, I'm glad I picked up the red flags and went back into the living room.
Story number 3.
Despite my love for all things creepy, I'm a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. Before I get downvoted to hell, I would like to preface this by saying I'm trying to emphasize that I believe that there is a logical explanation for everything. That time I saw the black figure floating above me for about 5 minutes. Sleep paralysis. That time I saw a pair of eyes reflecting some passing headlights in the cornfield across my house. A deer. But here is one that I have yet to find an explanation for, and maybe you can help. To give you some backstory, I'm from a little farm town that nobody's heard of. The road I grew up on was named after the great-great-great-grandfather of our church secretary's husband. Yeah, that kind of podunk town. It was the late 90s and I was probably 9 or 10 years old. My father worked third shift and was never home after 9:30 at night, and it was sometime in the late winter, probably January or February. At this time, I had a cat named Sassy. To answer your questions, no, she doesn't die in this story, and yes, I named her after the cat in the movie Homeward Bound. How original do you expect a 3-year-old to be? Sassy was the runt of her litter and incredibly docile. She never bit, never scratched, never hissed. At least not until this particular night. Our routine started out like normal. I'd gone to bed and was starting to drift off until Sassy decided to take her usual residence on my chest. I began absent-mindedly petting her as I worked on dozing off again, and and all of a sudden she stood up and hissed. I bolted upright, instinctively knowing something was wrong. I crept out into the hall just in time to hear a knocking on the door. As I came around the corner into the living room, I saw my mother frozen in shock and her hand still on the doorknob. There were two figures standing outside wearing what I would come to know as the Scream costumes. Time seemed to stand still, but the sound of my weight on the floorboards snapped my mother out of her trance. She slammed the door in their masked faces and locked it all in one swift motion. She dashed for the phone and herded me into the hallway, which was the darkest area of our house and the place where they would most likely be unable to see us if they were planning something. A police officer came very quickly and took my mother's statement and worked on calming her down. He then patrolled the neighborhood for at least the next hour while my mother called the neighbors to warn them and to see if they had any similar experiences. Unfortunately, the officer never did find anyone lurking around our house or the woods nearby, nor did our neighbors have any similar experiences. I found this particularly creepy for two reasons. Normally, I would assume that it was just a couple of asshat teenagers playing a prank, but looking back, they stood well over the height of my 5'6" mother, and I suspect that they were adults judging by their build. Furthermore, why us? Why our house? There were dozens of similarly laid out houses. The only thing I can think of, now that I'm writing this out, is that if they had observed us, they would know that we were the only people on the block without a man at home at night. If they were looking to perpetrate some sort of crime, a mother and her young daughter would certainly be the easiest to overpower. It still gives me the shivers thinking about it, and my mother often refuses to speak about it when I bring it up. Sassy never did hiss again. May she rest in peace. I've heard numerous stories about animals sensing tsunamis and other natural disasters, but not this type of thing. I still question what prompted her to hiss so violently and what might have happened if she hadn't. Let's just say I'm glad I'll never know. And of course, to those masked creeps all that time ago, let's not meet again.